Why did everyone fall silent when the palace guard advanced toward the jeering tourist? It wasn't just the sound of his boots on the stone courtyard. It was the rhythm, the weight, the kind of silence that wasn't absence but presence, as if centuries of unbroken discipline pressed down with each deliberate step. People felt it before they saw his eyes. A collective shiver ran through the crowd, laughter catching in throats, cameras lowering almost in shame. And yet, standing among them, she noticed something more, something the others didn't. She wasn't a tourist, not really. The scarf around her shoulders, the camera slung casually across her chest, the faint dust of sunscreen across her cheeks, all of it was cover. She had been told to blend in, to look harmless, curious, ordinary. To anyone else, she looked like another foreigner fascinated by the rigidity of ceremonial duty. But to her, this moment wasn't a spectacle, it was a test. The guard's silence wasn't hollow, wasn't a mask to hide fear. She knew that kind of silence. She had lived inside it for years. This was different. This was a silence filled with iron, with something almost ancient. The kind of silence that doesn't just resist noise, it devours it. And she couldn't stop watching him. The jeering man, a tourist in bright sandals, careless, loud, mocked the guard's posture. He leaned forward, laughing, trying to provoke. The crowd chuckled nervously, uncertain whether to join in or pull back. One young couple whispered to each other, glancing between the tourist and the soldier. A child tugged on her mother's sleeve, sensing something dangerous that the adults were too blind to see. Then the guard moved. One step forward, deliberate. It was enough to cut the air. The laughter died instantly, and she felt it like a strike inside her chest. She knew that step, not literally, not in this place, not in this uniform, but she had lived through moments where one single motion rewrote the entire atmosphere of a room or a street or a battlefield. That single step carried history, it carried authority, and it carried warning. Her pulse picked up. She had promised her team this mission was low risk. Surveillance only, blend in, observe, record, no contact, no exposure. But she knew better. Because there was something she hadn't told them, not yet. The weight of the radio pressed against her hip, silent, switched off, but still humming faintly with possibility. 2 streets away, her teammates sat cramped in a van, the smell of diesel and sweat mixing with their nervous jokes. They believed she was just another set of eyes in the crowd. They believed she'd call if anything seemed off. But she hadn't told them why she volunteered for this particular assignment. She hadn't told them what was at stake for her. The sunlight off the palace stones blinded her for a moment, and she blinked hard, forcing her eyes open again. Every detail sharpened, the guard's steady breathing, the faint squeal of a dove adjusting its wings on the roofline above, the scrape of leather sandals as the tourist shifted weight, oblivious. Her own hand trembled, just slightly, enough that she clenched it into a fist to hide it. She hated that, the tremor, no one else noticed, but she did. Because she remembered the last time her hands shook like this. It was in a desert, not a palace courtyard. The air had been filled with dust, not the fragrance of sun-warmed stone. She had carried a rifle, not a camera, and the person in front of her had been a boy, not a laughing man in sandals. That day, she made a choice she could never undo. Her voice cracked over the comms when she gave the all-clear. Her fingers squeezed when she wasn't sure, and for years after, every silence she lived in carried that boy's face somewhere inside it. Now here she was again, pretending to be invisible in a crowd, pretending this wasn't personal, pretending she wasn't measuring the distance between herself, the guard, and the jeering man as though every inch might matter. Because it would. The tourist laughed again, louder now, his voice bouncing off the palace walls. The crowd shifted back, discomfort rippling through them, but no one dared step in. They wanted a scene, but not the responsibility of stopping it. She felt her chest tighten, that familiar mixture of anger and helplessness, watching ordinary people treat discipline like a game, watching them provoke something sacred because they didn't understand what silence cost. The guard did not move fast, he didn't need to, another step forward, slow, unbroken. His weapon gleamed in the sun, his jaw locked in place. His eyes, unyielding, dark, alive with something no one else in the square understood, met hers. Only for a second. Too quick for anyone else to notice. But for her, time slowed. Her breath caught. Because in that glance she saw it, the weight he carried. He wasn't just guarding the palace, he wasn't just a uniform or a ceremony. He was guarding something else, something bigger. And in that look, sharp, almost imperceptible, he had passed some of that responsibility to her. Her throat tightened, she wanted to look away, to pretend she hadn't seen, but she couldn't. Because in him she recognized herself. Or rather, the version of herself she had buried under orders, regrets, and silence. The crowd murmured now, unease spreading. Someone whispered, "Is he going to do something?" A man coughed nervously. The child whimpered softly. Cameras clicked, though fewer now. The air was tense. Her grip on the camera strap tightened. She forced her body still. Because no one else knew. Not the crowd. Not the tourist, not even her own team waiting in the van. No one knew what was hidden inside this courtyard. Except her. And him. She exhaled slowly, letting the sound vanish into the heavy silence. This wasn't random, none of it. And though she didn't yet know how, she understood she was standing on the edge of something that would change her life again. Her story wasn't finished, the silence had only just begun. Why didn't she call it in? That question burned in her chest as the moment stretched thin, the palace guard locked in silent defiance, the jeering tourist still too arrogant to notice the danger he was walking toward. Her hand brushed the outline of the radio at her hip. She could press the button, break the silence, let her team know something was unfolding. But she didn't. Because this wasn't just about orders, it wasn't about mission protocol, it was about something else, something deeper. She told herself she was just waiting, waiting for a clearer signal, waiting for proof that this wasn't just theater. But beneath that excuse buried like shrapnel under scar tissue was truth. She needed to see this play out, needed to understand why the guard's silence rattled her more than the tourist's laughter. The sun pressed down hot against the back of her neck. Her scarf clung to her skin, beads of sweat forming at her hairline. Around her, the crowd seemed suspended, caught between unease and curiosity. They had come for photographs, for spectacle, for stories to carry home. They hadn't expected to witness the fragile line between discipline and eruption. The guard's eyes never left the tourist. His jaw was carved from stone, his weapon steady, posture perfect, but his silence, it wasn't empty, it was screaming without sound. And she understood it in a way no one else could. Because she too had once been trained to hold a line, to remain motionless when taunted, to wait when instinct screamed to move, to carry silence as both shield and sword. But she had broken once, and the cost of that failure followed her into every mission. The crowd shifted again. A middle-aged woman whispered sharply to her husband, tugging at his arm, urging him to pull her away from the unfolding scene. But the husband lingered, camera raised, greed in his eyes. The child began to cry softly, clutching her mother's leg. And still the tourist grinned. He stepped closer, too close, his sandals scraping against the smooth stone courtyard. He raised his hand as though to touch the guard's uniform, mockingly saluting, daring him to respond. Her pulse spiked. One more step, one more insult, one more second of arrogance, and the silence could break. She inhaled deep, steady. The decision pressed hard against her chest, call it in or stay hidden. But then something else caught her, something unexpected. The guard's lips parted, just slightly, not enough to form a word, not enough for the crowd to hear, but she saw it, a flicker of movement. A breath, a warning, a prayer. She couldn't tell. But in that half-second, the memory hit her again, the boy in the desert, the one who never got the chance to speak before she made her choice, the one whose silence still haunted her. And now here she was, reliving it in a palace courtyard thousands of miles away. Her chest tightened, she forced her eyes away from the guard and swept them across the edges of the square. That was when she saw him. Not the guard, not the tourist, someone else. At first, just a shadow near the far archway, someone who didn't fit the rhythm of the crowd, too still, too deliberate. His gaze wasn't on the guard or the tourist, it was scanning the people, scanning the exits. And in that instant, she knew. This wasn't about a tourist provoking a palace guard. This was about something bigger. Her fingers curled around the camera strap, tightening until her knuckles burned. The radio at her hip seemed heavier now. She had been right. And she hated being right. The guard wasn't guarding tradition. He wasn't just protecting the palace's image for the tourists' cameras. He was guarding against whatever waited in the shadow of that archway. And now so was she. Her mouth went dry, she wanted to whisper into the radio to call her team to let them know. But her voice felt trapped in her throat, pinned by memory and fear. What if she was wrong? What if she exposed herself too soon? What if she led them all into a trap because she still couldn't tell the difference between instinct and guilt? The tourist laughed again, oblivious. His voice cracked like glass in the silence, jagged and unwelcome. The guard's boots shifted just slightly, another step. The tension built thicker than the heat pressing down on them all. And still the shadow figure lingered. Her stomach knotted, she couldn't let this unfold blind, not again. Slowly, carefully, she raised her camera. She didn't point it at the guard or the tourist like everyone else. She angled it across the courtyard toward the archway. One click. The shudder echoed louder in her ears than it should have. The figure flinched. Confirmation. Her breath caught, it was him. She lowered the camera quickly, forcing her face blank, pretending she was just another sightseer with shaky nerves. But inside, adrenaline surged, flooding every nerve, ending with urgency. Now she knew. And knowing meant she could no longer stay silent. Her thumb brushed the switch on the radio. But then the guard moved again. This time not a single step, a shift, a deliberate repositioning, his weapon tilting, his weight redistributing. And for the first time the tourist froze. Because even arrogance has limits. The crowd held its collective breaths. And she, caught between memory and mission, between guilt and instinct, finally made her choice. Her voice broke the silence, soft, low, hidden beneath the cover of coughs and shifting feet. Eyes on the archway now. The radio clicked back, faint static buzzing in her ear, her team's voices confused, alert, questioning. But she didn't answer, not yet. Because even as she whispered into the silence, even as her words reached the van 2 streets away, she knew the truth. This wasn't just about the guard, or the tourist, or even the shadow in the archway. This was about her. About whether she could carry the silence this time without breaking it. Why didn't anyone else notice? That thought gnawed at her as she kept her eyes fixed on the archway. Dozens of tourists pressed around, cameras raised, necks craned, every pair of eyes locked on the guard and the man who taunted him. Their attention had tunneled, absorbed by the spectacle of defiance and discipline. But not hers. Hers was split, trained, distracted and sharpened at the same time, because while the world held its breath over a guard's silence, she had seen something else. The figure, the stillness in the shadows, the scan of eyes that didn't belong to a tourist. She could still feel the shudder of her camera echoing through her bones. That single click had given her proof, proof she wasn't imagining it, proof she wasn't trapped in memory. And yet, why was she the only one who saw? The guard's silence was commanding enough to drag the crowd into submission. The tourists' arrogance was loud enough to hold their attention, but to her, all of it was just noise around the truth. Something was coming. Her earpiece crackled softly, almost drowned out by the murmurs of the crowd. Repeat, eyes on the archway, say again. Her team, confused, alert. The sound of shifting gear, muffled curses, a chair scraping against metal as someone adjusted in the van. She closed her eyes for a fraction of a second. The heat, the tension, the memory of that boy in the desert, all of it collided inside her. She remembered the weight of her last mistake, the choice she had made too quickly, the silence she broke too soon. And she swore she wouldn't repeat it. Her voice came low, measured. Hold position, wait for my mark. A pause, static, then copy holding. She exhaled through her nose, forcing calm into her body even as adrenaline surged. She could almost hear her heart thudding in her ears. The guard moved again, not a step forward this time, but a shift in his stance, a subtle tightening of his grip. The tourist's laughter faltered, thinned, cracked. Fear crept into his voice, though his mouth still curled in a smirk. The crowd leaned forward, phones raised higher, hungry for conflict, blind to danger. And still, no one else noticed the shadow. Her gaze darted back, scanning the archway. He was still there, the man, not moving now, not hiding either, just waiting. His stillness was its own kind of silence. Her stomach clenched. Waiting for what? She adjusted her scarf, shielding her mouth as she whispered again. He's watching the exits, not the guard, not the crowd, us. Confirm ID, her teammate pressed. She hesitated. Because how could she confirm? All she had was instinct, a flicker of movement, the flinch at her shudder. Not enough for a report, not enough for an order. But enough for her. Negative, she whispered back, but he's not here for the show. A pause, she imagined their faces in the van, doubt, tension, glances traded in silence. They trusted her, but trust had limits. And she had already tested those limits too many times before. The memory clawed back again, the boy, the desert, the way she called it too soon, too sure, too desperate to prove herself right, and the cost, the silence after the shot, the silence that still lived inside her chest, refusing to leave. She swallowed hard. Not again. The guard's boots struck the stone as he shifted forward once more. The sound was sharp, final. The crowd recoiled instinctively, the tourist stumbling back half a step, laughter dying on his tongue. The child whimpered louder, pulled against her mother's grip. The middle-aged husband finally lowered his camera, unease clouding his expression. The silence thickened. And then movement. Not from the guard, not from the tourist, from the shadow. It was small, subtle, but she saw it. The man shifted weight, angled his body, his hand brushing near his side. Her lungs tightened. Weapon, signal, she couldn't tell. Her instinct screamed. Her hand hovered over the radio, thumb pressing lightly against the transmit switch. One word and her team would flood this square in seconds. One word and the silence would shatter. But she froze. Because what if she was wrong again? What if this wasn't a weapon? What if this wasn't danger? What if she tore open the crowd, turned a tense standoff into chaos, because she couldn't tell the difference between instinct and guilt? Her throat closed, she bit down on her lip so hard she tasted iron. Her team waited in her ear. The guard waited in silence. The tourist hovered in arrogance and fear. And the shadow waited for something she couldn't yet see. Every part of her wanted to move, to act, to break the silence. But she stayed still. Because silence wasn't always weakness. Sometimes silence was the only way to hear the truth. The sun dipped slightly behind a cloud, throwing the courtyard into cooler shade. The sudden change felt like a curtain lowering on a stage. She scanned the crowd again, faces, expressions, fear, anticipation. And then she noticed her own reflection, faint in a nearby window. Her scarf slipping, her eyes too sharp, her jaw set. She didn't look like a tourist anymore. And if she could see it, maybe he could too. Her stomach dropped. Because the man in the shadows had turned his head. And now his eyes were on her. Why did his eyes lock on hers? It wasn't curiosity, it wasn't chance, it was recognition. Not the kind of recognition where you know a face, but the kind where you know a type, a pattern, a threat. And in that instant she realized something terrifying. She was no longer invisible. The scarf, the camera, the posture of a wandering tourist, it wasn't enough anymore. He had picked her out of the crowd, carved her from the blur of faces like a blade slicing clean through fog. Her pulse spiked. The weight of the radio pressed into her palm as though urging her to act, call it in, say the word, end the silence. But she didn't. Because something inside her, something reckless, something raw wanted to hold this moment, to understand what he saw in her, to know why he hadn't moved yet. The crowd still buzzed with restless unease. Phones hovered, eyes darted nervously between the guard and the tourist. No one saw the invisible line that now stretched between her and the man in the archway. No one but them. She shifted slightly, angling her body, adjusting her scarf higher, but it was too late. The connection had been made. The man's eyes narrowed. A flicker of something passed across his face, calculation perhaps. And then he smiled. Her stomach turned cold. It wasn't a broad smile, not the foolish grin of the tourist. This was small, precise, a smile without joy, a smile meant only for her. She knew that smile. She had seen it in the desert. She had seen it in dimly lit rooms when deals were struck in whispers. She had seen it in mirrors once when she thought the mask of confidence would hide the fractures inside her. It was the smile of someone who knew he held the advantage. Her breath caught. The guard moved again, another deliberate step forward. The tourist stumbled, hands raised now, the bravado leaking from his posture. The crowd tensed, waiting for an explosion that never came. But she hardly noticed. Because the shadow had shifted too. His hand brushed his side again, this time not casual, this time clear. A weapon. She knew it before she saw the shape. The way his shoulder tightened, the way his arm bent. She had trained too many years not to recognize the mechanics of a draw. Her chest clenched. She pressed the radio switch, voice low, urgent. He's armed, archway, my position compromised. Static crackled, then voices overlapped. Confirm, say again, on our way. She closed her eyes, forcing her voice steady. Move now. The words tasted like iron, because once again she had broken the silence. And once again the cost was unknown. Her fingers trembled around the camera strap. She forced herself still, tried to steady her breath. But the man in the shadows didn't flinch, didn't retreat, didn't rush. He simply stood there, weapon at his side, his eyes still locked on her, his smile carved like a scar. The guard's silence commanded the crowd, but his silence commanded her. And she hated that. A ripple of panic spread through the tourists as the tension finally reached them. The child cried openly now, the mother dragging her back. The husband muttered nervously, tugging his wife toward the edge of the square. Phones lowered, shoulders hunched. Instinct whispered what they didn't yet understand. Danger was here. The tourist, red-faced, trembling, tried to mask his fear with laughter, but it cracked. He backed away from the guard, hands still raised, eyes darting to the shifting crowd. And in that chaos, she realized her mistake. By calling it in, she had changed the rhythm. Her team would come, boots, radios, movement, too fast, too loud. And the man in the archway, he would know. She cursed it under her breath, words drowned by the restless shuffle of feet. She had wanted control. Instead, she had triggered the storm early. The guard's eyes flicked once more toward her, brief, subtle enough. And she understood. He knew too. Not everything, not her mission, not her past, but enough. Enough to see the same truth she had seen in him earlier. They weren't guarding different things. They were guarding the same. And now the silence they both carried was about to break. Her mind spiraled back unbidden to the desert, the boy's face, the dust, the sound that wasn't silence but felt like it. She had acted then too fast, too certain, and she had lived with the weight ever since. Now the same choice loomed. Act too soon and the cost could be another innocent, wait too long and the cost could be everyone. Her earpiece crackled, 2 minutes out, hold position. 2 minutes. An eternity. The man in the archway shifted again, stepping slightly forward, the weapon still concealed but undeniable now. His eyes never left hers, his smile didn't fade. She felt it then, the old fear rising in her chest, the fear that she wasn't enough, that she wasn't ready, that she was still the same soldier who failed once and who would fail again. Her knees trembled, her hands shook, she clenched her fist hard enough to dig nails into her palm. And then she heard something. Not from the crowd, not from the guard, not from her team. From herself. Her own voice, quiet, steady from years ago, the voice she had buried under guilt and silence. You can't undo the past, but you can stand still long enough to carry the future. Her mentor's words, spoken on a night when the desert wind howled outside their tent, when she couldn't sleep, when regret ate at her skin. She swallowed. The man in the archway tilted his head, his smile widened just slightly. And in that moment she knew this wasn't about him. It wasn't even about the guard. It was about her. Whether she could hold the silence long enough, whether she could act at the right second, not too soon, not too late. The crowd shifted again, a ripple of whispers, a gasp as the tourist finally backed off completely, stumbling into the cluster of onlookers. Relief washed across faces. But not hers. Because the danger hadn't passed, it had only sharpened. She inhaled slowly, every nerve in her body stretched thin. And then, for the first time, she moved. Not much, just a step to the side, adjusting her angle, her camera still raised as though she were just another witness. But her eyes never left his. And his never left hers. The silence deepened. 2 minutes had never felt so long. Why was he smiling at her from across the firelight, as if he knew something she did? It wasn't the kind of smile that came from relief or joy, it was thinner, more brittle, like a crack in glass. For a moment she thought he was mocking her, but then she realized it was the only way he could keep from breaking. She didn't smile back. The night pressed in on their camp, heavy with silence, broken only by the popping of embers. The desert chill was sharp against her skin and the air smelled faintly of dust and oil. The squad sat scattered in a loose circle, each lost in their own thoughts. Some rubbed their hands against the cold, others stared into the flames as if answers could be found in their shifting shapes. She sat apart, not because they wanted her distant, but because she didn't know how close to get. Trust was fragile, and in war, fragile things often shattered without warning. One of the younger soldiers, Corporal Diaz, finally spoke. His voice was quiet, hesitant. Do you ever think about what we're doing here, like when this ends, what's left? Nobody answered at first. The question hovered, uninvited but heavy. She glanced at him, his hands were trembling slightly even though he tried to steady them against his knees. He was barely 22. His helmet sat beside him, scratched and dented, proof of close calls. He hadn't been hardened yet, not all the way. What's left, the lieutenant finally said. His tone was gruff but not cruel. You go home, you try to forget, or you don't. Diaz nodded, swallowing hard, as if that answer was both too much and not enough. She wanted to say something honest but softer, but words stuck in her throat. Instead, she thought of her own what's left. Her mother's voice on the phone, the brother she hadn't spoken to in years, a photograph tucked into her pack that she couldn't bear to look at anymore. What was left? Pain, memories, and maybe a chance to make sure someone else's brother got home, someone else's daughter. That had to be enough. The fire cracked louder, startling her back into the present. She blinked, realizing Diaz was still staring at her as if waiting for her to speak. She gave him a slow nod, a silent acknowledgement. It wasn't an answer, but it was something. His shoulders loosened just slightly. The night stretched long. At one point she wandered away from the circle, needing air. Her boots crunched softly over sand and rock. The stars above burned brighter than any city sky, unbothered by the world's violence below. She stopped, exhaling. And that's when she heard it, faint, carried by the wind, not gunfire, not machinery, a voice, or maybe two, too soft to make out but too deliberate to ignore. Her body tensed, her hand went to her rifle instinctively. She crouched low, eyes scanning the darkness. The ruins around them were silent, shadows stretching long, but the sound came again, closer this time, a word in a language she didn't fully understand, then a laugh. She turned back toward camp, signaling with her hand. Two soldiers rose instantly, rifles ready, moving in formation without a word. They trusted her instincts, they always had. The three of them crept forward, steps careful, breaths shallow. The voices grew clearer, two men speaking in hushed tones, unaware they were being overheard. She caught fragments, coordinates, movement, timing. Her chest tightened. This wasn't random chatter, it was a plan. She motioned for the others to stay back. She edged closer, heart hammering. The silhouettes of two figures came into view, half hidden behind a crumbling wall. They were armed, watching, waiting. Spies, scouts, or worse, bait. Her finger hovered on the trigger. She could end it now, silence the threat, but something held her back, a hesitation, a thought that struck too deep, too fast. What if they weren't who she thought? What if this was another mistake, another shadow turned into a monster? She steadied her breath. The seconds dragged like hours. One of the figures shifted, raising a hand to his radio. That was enough. Her rifle barked once, sharp and final. The other soldier fired a beat later. Both men crumpled before they could call out. The silence after was deafening. Her squad arrived seconds later, scanning, covering, confirming. One of them muttered under his breath a curse or a prayer. She stared at the two still forms, young like Diaz, maybe even younger. The blood spread dark beneath them, soaking into the earth. She felt the familiar knot twist in her stomach. Was this protection, or just another scar carved into the endless ledger of war? Later, back at camp, she sat alone again. The fire had died down, leaving only ash and smoke. The others slept, but she couldn't. Her mind replayed it in fragments. The sound of the shot, the look of them falling, the pause before she decided. Her hands wouldn't stop trembling. She closed her eyes. In the quiet, her mother's voice rose again from memory. Don't let them take your soul, Anna, no matter what uniform you wear. Her throat tightened. She whispered into the darkness as if her mother could hear her across miles and years. I'm trying. But even as the words left her lips, she wasn't sure it was true. The night gave no answer, only silence, the kind that pressed heavy on the chest. And yet beneath that silence a small resolve stirred, not clarity, not peace, but something stubborn. Tomorrow there would be another choice, another hesitation, another line she would have to cross or hold. And she had to believe for herself, for Diaz, for all of them, that she could still choose with dignity. Even if dignity didn't speak, even if it only acted. Why was the map folded like that, with the edges worn as if someone had studied it too many times? She stared at it in the dim red glow of the tent light, her fingers tracing the creases. It wasn't just paper, it was a question, a weight, a path that would decide who lived and who didn't. The briefing had ended an hour ago, but she couldn't sleep. The others had collapsed into uneasy rest, trusting orders, trusting fate. But she lay awake, her mind replaying every word, every pause, every silence that hung heavy between the sentences. The target wasn't just a structure, it was a rumor turned into coordinates, a place where something important or someone important was supposed to be hiding. The intel was fragile, stitched together from whispers and shadows, but the risk was real. If they moved, they might walk into fire. If they didn't, they might miss their only chance. Her chest rose and fell slowly as she stared at the map. A line of ink cut through the ruins like a scar, marking the route. She remembered her brother's voice, faint from memory, years old. You can't always wait until you're sure, Anna. Sometimes you have to move before certainty comes. But he hadn't been the one to live with the weight of wrong decisions. He hadn't had to carry ghosts. A soft noise at the entrance pulled her back. A shadow lingered before stepping inside, Diaz. His face was pale, drawn from exhaustion, but his eyes searched hers. You're awake too, he whispered. She nodded, folding the map quickly, as if it could hide her unrest. Do you think we're walking into something bad? He asked. The question was raw, vulnerable. She hesitated. She could lie, tell him no, tell him to rest, reassure him with words she didn't believe. Or she could hand him the truth, sharp as glass. Instead, she gave him something in between. I think we're walking into something that matters, and that's enough. His lips pressed into a thin line. He accepted the answer, even if it didn't calm him. He sat down across from her, hugging his rifle close. When this is over, what's the first thing you'll do? Back home, I mean. The question caught her off guard. She thought of her mother's kitchen, the smell of bread baking. She thought of sitting at a table that wasn't covered in maps, surrounded by voices that weren't whispers of danger. She thought of a letter she'd never sent, folded in the bottom of her pack. I don't know, she said softly. Maybe I'll just sit and listen to nothing, to silence that doesn't hurt. Diaz's mouth twitched, almost a smile. I'll eat until I can't move. The tent went quiet again, but not heavy, softer this time, almost human. When the dawn came, it came gray and cold. The squad moved out, boots crunching over stone and dirt. The ruins ahead loomed jagged against the horizon. The air smelled like dust and smoke, as if the earth itself remembered battles fought long before theirs. She walked point, every step felt measured, deliberate. The silence stretched, too much silence. Her hand lifted in a signal, stop. The squad froze, breath shallow. Then it came, a sound carried by the wind, metal scraping, a click. Ambush. Gunfire exploded, sharp and violent, tearing the silence apart. the air filled with dust with screams with the crack of rounds hitting stone. She hit the ground, pressing into cover, returning fire in bursts. The squad moved like muscle memory, each covering the other, each shouting over the chaos. Her ears rang, the world narrowing to flashes of muzzle fire and the thud of her heart. Diaz was pinned behind a collapsed wall, shouting something she couldn't hear. She caught his eyes, wide, terrified, a boy trying to be a soldier. Her body moved before thought could catch up. She sprinted low, bullets tearing the air around her. Dust stung her eyes, her lungs burned. She slid into cover beside him, grabbing his arm. "Breathe," she barked, forcing steadiness into her voice. "Aim, don't panic with me." Together they leaned out, firing. One by one, the attackers faltered. The squad tightened their formation, pushing forward, turning chaos into control. Minutes stretched like hours, then silence again. This time it was thick with aftermath. The echoes of violence lingered in the ruins like ghosts. Bodies lay still, dust hung in the air. Her chest heaved as she looked around. Everyone was alive, shaken, bruised, but alive. Diaz dropped back against the wall, trembling. His face was pale, his breaths uneven. I thought I was done," he whispered. She gripped his shoulder, holding his gaze. "Not today." But even as she said it, her own hands wouldn't stop shaking. When the squad regrouped, the lieutenant's eyes met hers. He didn't speak, but his nod carried weight, respect, acknowledgement. She turned away, staring at the ruins ahead. They hadn't even reached the target yet. This was just the beginning. The silence pressed in again, different now, not absence, not peace, a silence filled with what almost happened and what still might. She felt the knot in her chest tighten. Each step forward would ask the same question: was she strong enough to keep carrying this? The answer wasn't in words, it was in action, always in action. And though the silence haunted her, she kept moving. Because sometimes silence wasn't empty, sometimes it was the only thing left after survival. Why did her hands linger so long on the shattered wall, as if the stone itself could answer the questions no one else would? The sun was sinking, throwing long shadows over the ruins, painting everything in gold and ash. Her squad moved carefully through the wreckage, scanning, clearing, whispering, but she was still listening. Something wasn't right. The intel had promised a safe route once they passed the choke point, but safety was a word that had lost meaning months ago. The air itself felt charged, waiting, like a held breath. Her boots crunched over broken tiles as she stepped deeper into the courtyard. The silence was louder here, unnerving, no birds, no echoes, just stillness that felt wrong. She raised a fist. "Stop." The squad froze, instantly obedient, eyes turned to her, waiting for a sign. She lowered to a crouch, brushing her fingers across the dust. Their faint impressions, not old, fresh. Someone had moved through here not long ago. Her throat tightened. She glanced back at Diaz, who looked pale again, his jaw clenched. He was learning fast that silence in war didn't mean peace. It meant something worse was coming. They pressed forward, tighter now, the courtyard narrowing into a hall of broken pillars. Her heartbeat quickened with every step. She could feel the memory of last night pressing against her, her mother's voice, the bodies in the dust, the hesitation she still hadn't forgiven herself for. Then the sound. A single metallic click. She dove sideways just as the explosion ripped through the ground where they had been standing. The blast threw dust, fire, and shards of stone into the air. Ears rang, vision blurred. She scrambled, coughing, searching for her rifle, her squad. Voices shouted the ambush had begun. Figures emerged from the smoke, rifles flashing. The world narrowed into chaos, fragments of movement, screams, the desperate rhythm of survival. She found cover behind a pillar, pulling Diaz down with her. His hands were slick with blood, not his, but another soldier's he'd tried to drag to safety. His face was a mask of horror. She met his eyes, steadying him with her own. "Stay with me, stay in it." They leaned out together, firing in sharp bursts. Stone shattered around them. The attackers pressed hard, ruthless, confident. And then she saw him. Not Diaz, not her squad, the man giving orders in the smoke. The one her intel had whispered about, the reason they were here. Her breath caught. It wasn't the face of a stranger. It was a face she hadn't seen in years. A face from a photograph once tucked into her pack. A face tied to the past she'd buried to survive. Her brother. For a moment the battle blurred into silence. The gunfire faded, the shouts dimmed. All she could see was him, standing where no part of her life should have allowed him to stand. Her rifle trembled in her hands. The squad shouted, returning fire. Diaz cursed, pulling at her sleeve. "We need you." But she couldn't move, not yet, not with her heart tearing open. Why was he here, on the other side? The question burned, cruel and unanswerable. Her brother raised his weapon, shouting something to his fighters. His voice carried through the smoke, commanding, certain. And she froze. The silence inside her was deafening. For the first time in years, she wasn't just a soldier. She was a sister, a daughter, a broken piece of a family that war had split apart. And in that moment she knew, the mission was no longer just about survival, it was about truth, about a choice that would scar her forever, no matter which way it fell. She pressed her back against the pillar, heart hammering, breath ragged. Her squad was waiting for her orders. Her brother was waiting for her hesitation. And somewhere between the two, she felt herself begin to break. Why was the world suddenly so quiet, even with gunfire echoing around her? She crouched low, back pressed against broken stone, rifle trembling in her hands. The courtyard was smoke and chaos, but all she could see, all she could feel was the shape of him through the haze. Her brother, alive, here, on the wrong side of her rifle. Her breath came shallow, ragged. Her squad shouted over the noise, their voices sharp and urgent. "We're pinned, we need orders, Anna." But she couldn't answer. The years collapsed in a rush, the sound of him laughing in their kitchen, the arguments before he disappeared, the silence that followed. And now here he was, wearing the uniform of an enemy she was sworn to destroy. How do you aim at blood? How do you pull the trigger when it erases not just a threat, but your past, your family, the last fragile thread to who you once were? Her brother raised his rifle, signaling his fighters forward. For a fraction of a second, their eyes locked. Recognition flared, raw, undeniable. His mouth opened as if to call her name. She flinched. A bullet cracked past her ear, snapping her back into the fight. Diaz was shouting at her, fear and trust tangled in his voice. "Anna, what do we do?" She swallowed hard, the knot in her chest tightened until it hurt to breathe. Her squad needed her, and so did the boy across the smoke, though not in any way she could give. She forced herself to move. Orders spilled from her lips, sharp and clipped. "Cover left, push forward in pairs, don't let them flank us." The squad obeyed instantly, pulling strength from her steadiness even as she felt herself unravel inside. Bullets shredded the air, fighters fell. The battle pressed closer, brutal, relentless. And then it was just them. Her squad had driven the others back, scattering into the ruins. The courtyard emptied, the gunfire fading, but her brother stayed, rifle lowered now, breathing hard, watching her. The silence between them was unbearable. He stepped forward, slow, cautious, dust clung to his face. His eyes searched hers, desperate, pained. Anna. The sound of her name on his lips nearly broke her. Her rifle was raised, but her finger froze above the trigger. Her squad fanned out, weapons trained, waiting for her call. One wrong word and they would fire. One order and her brother would fall. Her voice caught in her throat. Her brother's eyes glistened. "You don't understand. You don't know why I—" A shout cut him off. Another fighter, unseen in the rubble, raised his weapon at Diaz. Anna didn't think, she moved. Her rifle barked once, the shot echoing like thunder. The fighter collapsed. Diaz stumbled back, alive, wide-eyed, staring at her with shock and gratitude. But when she turned back, her brother was gone. Vanished into the smoke, retreating with the last of his fighters. Only silence remained, heavy and suffocating. The courtyard was theirs, but the victory felt hollow. Her squad regrouped, bruised, shaken, alive. They looked at her with respect, with relief. Diaz muttered, voice trembling, "You saved me." She gave him a nod, it was all she could manage. But inside she was shattered. Because saving him had meant losing someone else. That night, under the weight of the stars, she sat apart again. The squad slept, clinging to the fragile piece of survival. She stared into the distance where the ruins disappeared into shadow. Somewhere out there, her brother was breathing the same night air. Alive, enemy, family. Her hands trembled as she reached into her pack. She pulled out the letter, the one she had never sent. The edges were worn, the ink faded. Her brother's name stared back at her in her own handwriting. Tears stung her eyes. She hadn't cried in years, not for herself, not for anyone. She whispered into the night, voice breaking, "I couldn't do it, I couldn't end you." The silence gave no answer, only the faint crackle of the fire, the breath of the wind through broken stone. And yet, beneath it all, something fragile stirred. Not peace, not closure, but dignity. The kind that came from choosing not to let war erase the last of her humanity. She closed her eyes, letting the silence wash over her. It didn't heal, it didn't comfort, but it was real. And sometimes that was enough. Because dignity doesn't speak, it doesn't shout. It simply acts. And in that silence, the story lingered, a weight, a choice, a wound carried into tomorrow.